Picture a man at his kitchen table the night before the most important day of his professional life. He is 67 years old. He has spent decades in a lab, studying the way blood behaves, earning degrees from Cambridge, building a body of work that spans nearly 200 patents. He knows exactly what the company he works for has been doing, and he knows that tomorrow, under oath, he will have to answer for it.
The truth was going to cost someone everything, and he decided it was going to be him.
To understand what Ian Gibbons knew, you have to understand what Theranos was actually selling. The product at the center of the company was a device called the Edison, named, reportedly, by Elizabeth Holmes herself, after Thomas Edison's line about finding 10,000 ways that won't work. The Edison was supposed to run hundreds of diagnostic blood tests from a single finger prick. The blood was collected in something called a nanotainer, 12.9 millimeters tall, a couple of drops. The pitch was that this little machine would democratize medicine. You'd walk into a Walgreens, give a drop of blood, and know your results before you left.
Who validated that claim before it went public? Was there any independent scientific review before they started putting these machines in front of patients?
That's exactly the question Theranos spent years making sure no one could answer. The company operated under what Holmes called stealth mode, a deliberate policy of secrecy that she justified as protecting trade secrets. But what stealth mode actually did was prevent any outside review of the technology. And what the technology was actually doing, behind the branding and the board and the billion-dollar valuation, was giving patients inaccurate results. Theranos was secretly running the majority of its blood tests not on Edison devices at all, but on commercially available Siemens machines, the same equipment you'd find in any conventional lab. The Edison, when it was used, routinely failed.
So the proprietary device, the thing the entire company's value was built on, was largely decorative.
That's what the evidence shows. Adam Rosendorf, who served as Theranos' lab director, testified at trial that he found the Edison instruments to be unsuitable for clinical use. The FDA eventually classified the nanotainer as a Class II medical device requiring validation. Theranos had been arguing all along that it was Class I, unregulated. They were wrong, and they knew they were wrong. Ian Gibbons was the first experienced scientist Elizabeth Holmes ever hired. He came to Theranos in 2005, recruited by his colleague Channing Robertson, a Stanford professor who was the company's first board member. Gibbons had a PhD in biochemistry from Cambridge, a postdoctoral fellowship at Berkeley, 30 years in medical diagnostics, and 19 patents at BioTrack Laboratories alone. His specialty was immunoassays, the exact science at the heart of what Theranos was trying to do. When he arrived, he was named Chief Scientist and Senior Director of Assay Development. On paper, he was the person responsible for making the technology work.
And in practice?
In practice, he was a man trying to hold a standard that the company had already decided it couldn't afford to meet. Gibbons insisted that blood test results on Theranos devices had to match benchmark results from established analyzers. That sounds like a minimum requirement. At Theranos, it put him in constant conflict with engineers and senior management. He told his wife Rochelle, who was herself a scientist and patent lawyer, that nothing at Theranos was working. He knew Holmes was making false demonstrations to clients. He knew she was lying to employees about how close the technology was to being ready. He kept trying to solve it anyway.
There's something specific about that. The impulse to keep fixing a problem that the people above you have decided isn't a problem. He was doing real scientific work inside a company that had already moved past caring whether the science worked.
And the company made sure he couldn't do it effectively. Holmes operated Theranos with deliberately siloed departments. Employees were forbidden from talking to each other about their work. The official reason was trade secret protection. The actual effect was that no single person could ever see the complete picture of how badly the technology was failing. Gibbons found the siloing prevented effective problem-solving. When he tried to alert executives that the Edison wasn't performing, senior management didn't fix the problem. They warned employees who raised questions about accuracy.
So the structure wasn't just dysfunctional. It was engineered to contain the failure. Who inside the company would have had enough visibility to see the whole thing?
Holmes, and Ramesh Balwani, her partner and company president, who we'll come back to. Beyond them, the siloing was so deliberate that it seems designed precisely so that answer would always be, only her. Gibbons was eventually demoted from his chief scientist role. He continued working under his successor, Paul Patel. He was 67 years old, had been through chemotherapy and multiple surgeries for colon cancer, and was still showing up to a job that had stripped him of his title and his ability to fix what he knew was broken. In 2013, Theranos became entangled in a lawsuit involving its patents. Ian Gibbons was scheduled to be deposed. It's worth noting what that meant for him specifically. Holmes's name appears on 19 patents that Gibbons actually authored. A deposition about Theranos's intellectual property was, for him, a deposition about his own life's work and what had been done with it. The night of May 22, 2013, Gibbons intentionally overdosed on acetaminophen. His wife, Rochelle, woke the next morning and found him. He was rushed to the hospital. She called Theranos to let them know he wouldn't be coming in. He died on May 23 from liver failure. He was 67 years old.
She called to say her husband was dying, and what she got back from Theranos was a lawyer.
2 letters arrived. One was an email demanding the return of all intellectual property, his phone, his laptop, any lab books or files. The other was a letter from Theranos' legal team warning Rochelle against telling anyone what had happened to Ian. Holmes never called. She never sent condolences. Ian Gibbons had worked at Theranos for 10 years. The company's first response to his death was to secure its assets and silence his widow.
He was 40 years in science. He was the person who made the work credible. And the morning after he died, the company was already in containment mode.
Rochelle Gibbons has spoken publicly about her husband's experience in the years since. She told CBS News she blames Elizabeth Holmes for his death. She said Ian felt he would lose his job if he told the truth, that they kept him around to keep him quiet. Her words, not an inference, kept him around to keep him quiet. What she described was a man who understood what he knew, understood that he couldn't say it, and had been living in that impossibility for years. While Gibbons was alive, the harm was still largely internal. Scientists in conflict with management, inaccurate results moving through a system not yet visible to regulators. After his death, Theranos expanded. In January 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services found that Theranos' Newark, California lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. The specific issue was warfarin testing. Warfarin is a blood thinner. If your dosage is wrong, too high or too low, the consequences include internal bleeding, stroke, or death. Patients were adjusting their medication based on Theranos results. In May 2016, Theranos voided 2 full years of Edison device results.
When you void 2 years of results, you are telling patients, retroactively, that every decision you made in that window may have been based on nothing.
And there's no mechanism to trace what those decisions were. The Arizona Attorney General eventually filed suit and settled for $4.65 million. Refunds to every Arizona resident who received a Theranos test, regardless of whether they'd been notified their results were wrong. Approximately 1.5 million inaccurate blood tests had been run in Arizona alone. The full scope of patient harm remains unknown. For every person who got a letter, there were people who never knew their results had been voided, who made a treatment decision in that gap and never found out the data under it was fiction.
What was the regulatory timeline here? How does a company run clinical tests on millions of patients for over a decade without a serious federal intervention?
That's the failure that sits underneath the fraud. Holmes argued aggressively that her devices weren't subject to FDA oversight. The company operated in a gray zone it had deliberately constructed. The board, stacked with former secretaries of state and defense, not scientists, provided credibility without scrutiny. It wasn't until 2015 that meaningful FDA inspections began surfacing violations. By January 2016, CMS had issued a warning letter. By July 2016, Theranos' clinical lab certificate was revoked. The company had been running tests on patients since 2013. Holmes was ultimately convicted of fraud against investors and sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. The patient fraud charges, the harm to the people whose blood was actually in those machines, did not result in a conviction.
The people who built the board and the brand are the ones the system protected. The patients who never knew their results were wrong are the ones it didn't.
The Edison device gave inaccurate results, and Theranos knew it. The company was secretly running the majority of its tests on commercially available Siemens machines, while charging patients and partners for proprietary technology that didn't work.
Which means Walgreens was paying Theranos for something Siemens was actually doing, and patients were told otherwise.
Holmes personally manipulated documents presented to investors, including forged letters from Pfizer and Schering-Plough purporting to validate Theranos technology. She admitted this at trial.
The validation was the product. Without it, there was no company, so she manufactured it.
When then Vice President Joe Biden toured the Theranos facility, Holmes and Balwani constructed a fake lab for the visit. Biden praised what he saw. The real lab was not what he saw.
She was staging credibility the same way she staged the science.
Ian Gibbons authored the patents that bear Elizabeth Holmes's name. He spent his last years at Theranos demoted, silenced, and watching technology he knew was unsafe be put in front of patients he could not protect. After his death, the company's first communication with his widow was a legal demand.
He was the science. She took that too.
In May 2016, Theranos voided 2 full years of Edison device results. Patients who received notification had no way of knowing which medical decisions they had made on the basis of those results.
And the ones who weren't notified had even less than that.
Here is what this story is, at its core. A woman built a company on a technology that didn't work and decided that the speed of the lie mattered more than the weight of the consequences. She built walls inside her own organization so that no single person could see the full shape of the failure. She surrounded herself with powerful names who asked the wrong questions, or none at all. And when a man who had spent 40 years understanding exactly what she was doing tried to find a way to live inside that truth, the pressure became more than he could carry. The machine that couldn't run tests did, in the end, run something. It ran out the clock on every patient who couldn't afford to wait for the truth.
The question I can't get past is this. How many people who received a Theranos result never knew to ask whether it was real and made a decision, maybe a permanent one, on the strength of a number that meant nothing?
That's the question Theranos made sure we'd never be able to fully answer. And that's the most deliberate thing about all of it.